Hello, boys and girls of credit union land, and welcome to the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders and the publisher of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Melina Palmer. She is the host of the Brainy Business podcast. She has dedicated her career to seeking the answers to the questions, what is behavioral economics and why does it matter to you? She's trying to find the answer to these questions for herself and her clients, who she happens to work with companies and entrepreneurs to understand the small changes that can make a big difference to increase engagement and, for our accounting and finance folks, ROI. Melina has been a contributor to the CUInsight community for a long time and was one of the people that I reached out to when we were thinking of starting this podcast. She helped me so much answering my questions and giving some tips to get this thing launched and off the ground. Her advice, information, what she was willing to share was invaluable, and I am thankful for that. I found this conversation so intriguing. We talked for a while after we stopped recording, and it made me realize that I probably need to get her back on the show. There's so much more to talk about, or well, I'll just have to listen to her podcast weekly. Such a fun conversation about behavioral economics and why we choose to buy what we do. As always, Melina shared her leadership and life hacks from her career, and we wrapped it up having a little bit of fun with the rapid fire questions. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Melina Palmer. Enjoy. Melina, welcome to the show. I have been so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Me too.
I will tell you that you were one of the first people that I reached out to when thinking about starting a podcast, because you have yours, the Brainy Business, which I am a subscriber to, and we will link to, and I hope everybody subscribes to. And I mean, just publicly, I want to say thank you so much for all your help and support as we were getting this CUInsight experience up and running. So it's been amazing. Yes,
absolutely. Happy to help.
So I want to jump right into the questions. There was so much from listening to your podcast and reading your blog that I wanted to talk about, knew the directions we could go. So, we'll just get right into it. Will you tell our audience how you became involved with behavioral economics, and also just a quick definition, what that means for our listeners?
Right. Yes. So I used to, I did marketing at Verity Credit Union in Seattle for 6 years. And in that process, I was part of Filene's i3 program and did a lot of other really great programs. I'm a big fan of the industry, as you know. And when I did my undergrad in marketing, there was just like one piece of one class that talked about the psychology behind buying behavior, why people make decisions and do the things they do. And I was enthralled. I knew this was what I wanted to go to school for, learn more about, get a master's in. But, I spent the better part of 10 years calling universities. There were no programs, nothing existed yet. And so I was supplementing with lots of other learning, which I love. And as I was in the i3 program, they brought out to one of the presentations folks from the Center for Advanced Hindsight out of Duke University. And they were talking about some of the studies they were doing. And I realized this was it. This is the thing that I'd been looking for. And they let me know it was called behavioral economics. It was just becoming a field and getting to have a presence. And so I went and found myself a master's program in behavioral economics and have been able to dedicate my career to that now since I left Verity 2.5 years ago.
Wow.
And I know time flies, right? So behavioral economics is essentially, the reason it came about is traditional economics had this issue of assuming logical people making rational choices. And that's not the world we live in. And so the models were often wrong. And this is the same reason why when we do surveys and people say they'll buy this and, oh, if you do that, I'll definitely do this. And then they don't. It's because of the way that our brains actually make choices. So it's like the combo of economics and psychology. I like to say if they had a baby, it would be behavioral economics. And it's just looking for those common threads in how the brain makes decisions to help be able to more accurately predict behavior.
So I find this so intriguing. I've always said about myself, like I don't really come up with anything original, but I love watching trends. So and trying to get on things maybe a little bit before everybody else does, or just seeing, I mean, that the idea of how I'm a people watcher, in general. Why is behavioral economics? I mean, like, why does it matter not only to business, but even individuals?
It matters because it's every decision we make all the time, from where we set down our keys to which hand we use to brush our teeth in the morning, to the products we buy, whether we decide to litter, whether we turn down the thermostat to save money or the environment or whatnot. And if you choose to refinance an auto loan or whatever it is. And the thing that we found is that, the field, is that the subconscious brain, it's making most of our decisions. And it's actually the highest study I've seen put this at 99.999% of decisions being made by the subconscious brain, which if you didn't do the quick math, that means 0.001 would be done by your conscious brain. And then, the lowest study I've seen is at 95. So it's like 99% of decisions are done by the subconscious, and it's constantly running a filter. I like to say it's kind of like the gatekeeper or the receptionist when you're trying to get a meeting with the executive. You have to really do something special to get through. And so the subconscious is looking around constantly and saying, that's normal. I have a rule for that. That's normal. I have a rule for that. Normal, 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 normal. Hey, flag, that's kind of weird. Conscious brain, you're up. And so if you can't break through that subconscious filter, it's doing things based on what it's always done and applying different rules to make a choice. So I can see that you have a perplexed face. So I'm going to give an example.
I'd love to hear the example, because my question was, is it something that should we be training our subconscious mind? Is that...
That's some of it. Yeah. But the best example for this is to know that, so they're going at the same time all the time. If you think about when you learned to drive a car,
yep.
It was a very cumbersome, slow process, especially if you were learning on a stick shift and you're looking at where your hands go and where the mirrors are and which foot do I use and how do I do this? It's very tedious. It's a thing you're having to focus on. When you drove your car today, your brain is still making all those same decisions over and over again, but they've moved into the subconscious processing. It's automatic now. Your brain knows how to do that. And if my old car had a step emergency brake, and I'm one of those that always puts on my e-brake. And then I would get in my husband's car and do this sort of like step to nowhere, because he has a pull brake,
okay,
right?
Yep.
And my brain has a rule. It knows that it's supposed to, we do this, then we do that. Then we put our seatbelt on, and then we step and take the e-brake off, and then I turn on the car, whatever. It has all those rules, and it's doing that for the entire world around you all the time. This could also be if you're, driving is super easy until you're between a semi-truck and a guardrail and it's pouring rain and you feel like everything gets really slow. And that's because your conscious brain has taken over the process.
It's interesting. I'm a huge fan and believer in mindfulness, and yet a horrible practicer of it. But when I think a lot of the times of, does this relate at all? I guess I would say the idea that, like, taking the time to meditate and slow down the brain to recognize the thoughts, but then let them pass. Right. I was hearing so much of this, and like what you're talking about, to say, okay, just because that's the way my brain is now wired from habit to thinking doesn't mean that's the way I have to think. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And there was a study that was looking at, changing even just one tiny thing. So I believe the main piece was, if you typically ate your cereal, apparently most people do cereal first and then they pour milk on top. I'm a weird person that I do milk first and then I put the cereal on top.
Do you really? Wow.
Now you know I don't like soggy cereal. So, but where they said if you were to just do this switch and change that one tiny thing, and if you were to put milk first into and then pour the cereal, you would be more innovative and creative basically for the whole day. You've like primed your brain to do something a little bit different. So if you always brush your teeth with your right hand and then you try it a few times with the left. But again, you don't want that to be the new normal, the new rule. It's like doing something a little bit different every day can cause your brain to not get so bored, taking a different route to work or finding different things to focus on that matter. So you don't want to, you can't focus on everything all the time because we'd never get anything done. But knowing the things that matter to you and where you should put more into it, you can be more mindful and train your brain to expand, be more creative, and make a difference in your work and your life.
In your personal life. There was a question that this came from, like I said, listening to your podcast. It seems like you work a lot with businesses and credit unions on pricing.
Yes.
So does it really matter if we end our prices in 99 cents or 97 cents? And if it does, why?
So the short answer would be no, but.
But there's a but. Okay. We want the but.
Yes. So I have told, and I have episode 5 of the podcast is the truth about pricing. So I go into that. Really, pricing is never about the price. It's all the stuff that happens before you get to the pricing matters more than the price itself. So whether it's hesitancy or you're turning people off with too much information before you get to the price, or you inadvertently prime somebody with this, well, I mean, I know it's a little bit high. And so if you want, we can be negotiable, right? You're setting them up to where the price is going to be something they're concerned about. It's just how that all comes together. And that's from website conversations, what have you. All this stuff matters before you get to the pricing. And so with that in mind, it really doesn't matter once you get to the actual price. But there have been some studies that show that if you have a rounded number, so it ends in a 0 versus a 9 or whatnot, and not even getting into the change, but it's, $500, let's say, that feels like it's a full price, and anything that is going to be below. So if it's $4.99, $4.98, $4.97, you're priming the brain with this deal budget mentality. We feel like that is a discount, even if it's your standard price. And so if you're putting something out there and you're wanting to be affiliated with being at a discount, then it can be good to have those numbers in the 975, whatever you want to choose. But for things that are considered more of a luxury or a treat, so like bottles of wine, people prefer to have them be at rounded prices, even if it's more expensive, and you feel like you're getting this benefit. It's this joy that comes from actually paying more, that you don't want discount bargain wine in a lot of cases. And so then understanding what it is that you're putting out there and what you're trying to say about your entire brand matters. But then once you decide you're going to be at a discount, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. That's
interesting. I've never, I mean, when I listened to that episode, that was the first I'd thought of, like I'd heard in like real estate, you round down to 99. So you hit searches and things like that. But the idea that to make us think that that's a discount when we see that, and again, I thought just to myself, and I'm like, that makes sense. I could see myself thinking that way when like, why are you saying whatever $4.99 instead of $500, right? So could you talk a little bit about anchoring and adjustment, just how it works? I guess that was another, there were so many things, like not only preparing for this, but that I've learned, like I said, listening to your podcast. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that you listen to the podcast.
I love it.
And anchoring and adjustment is one of my favorite concepts. And I actually did an article for CUInsight that was the one word that had a 38% increase in sales. So changing one word, and it had this, and this concept was anchoring and adjustment. So I'm sure there'll be a link to that in the show notes.
We were going to link to everything. So
perfect. And so essentially the study there was they did different end cap displays in grocery stores. And one said Snickers bars, buy them for your freezer. The other says Snickers bars, buy 18 for your freezer. And 18 is a lot of Snickers bars. We don't assume that that's what people typically buy. And if you were the person marketing or creating this or approving this message, if you're on the executive team, And you would look and go, oh, 18, we don't want to be, someone's going to ask where we came up to that. It's arbitrary. I don't want somebody to be needing us to justify this number, and them is unlimited. We could get 100 Snickers bars if they wanted. So you would probably steer away from putting this big random number in place. But what the study found is when it had the number 18 instead of the word them, it resulted in a 38% increase in sales because of how our brains work off of a number anchor and then adjust. So with the word them, you're starting from nothing. And the question is, do I want to buy Snickers or not? And then you can get into this logical space if it makes it through. And like maybe you'll buy 2 if you are swayed by them, maybe 3, right? With the number 18 and it's out there, your brain, it's much more likely to make it through the subconscious filter because you think, whoa, 18, have I been buying Snickers wrong all these years? I didn't even know. Yeah. But also then you will think, 18, I'm much better than everybody else. I don't need 18. I'll just get 6, right? So you come down from that big number, and that anchor can be setting the stage for what's to come. And so that's when you are doing pricing, the thing you should always do is almost always, you put the highest number first, and you can set sort of a decoy item that's not as good of a value that comes first to make it very clear that the thing that's a little bit lower priced is now, it seems like a deal. It's better. It's something we want, even if it's at a rounded number, because we think, ooh, I don't want to pay $5,000 for this thing, but look, there's this $3,500 package. That sounds really good. I'll move forward with that. I actually had someone who listened to the podcast who works in a credit union that emailed me after listening and said, I use this with my boss, and I found a conference I wanted to go to, that was a little bit different budget than what we've done in the past, but I found another one that was similar that was, $2,000 more. So I found this one, it could be good. But then I also found this, it seemed like a better use of budget. What do you think? And they said, oh yeah, you should definitely go to that one. So setting the anchor.
Teaching people how to get their ways. So
right.
Would this fall into, there was an episode that I recalled listening to that you have about the top 5 wording mistakes that businesses make. Does this tie into that? Or what are some of those mistakes if you wouldn't mind sharing?
It does. Yeah. So this is what I listed as being too vague. So in the case of them, it's just this general thing. You're not setting any sort of anchors in the brain. And it doesn't have to be a number. There are other things that can be anchors. The other of the top 5 are too much, which doesn't need a lot of explanation. Right. The one thing I would say is if you look at it and wonder, is this too much? It is. Yeah. There's also being too boring. And this is, again, trying to break through the filter. So understanding what's going to be different. And in a commoditized industry like credit unions are in, everything sort of blends together. I give an example of cotton candy grapes in there and how they've become this phenomenon. And they're just grapes, right? Grapes. But they've been able to make them a little bit more different. There's also too literal, which is this, if you have something in your lobby or on your website that you were named, best in whatever area, in 2009, get rid of it.
That's actually a pet peeve of mine. I say that at restaurants all the time, right? Like where you're like, best of 2011. Well, what's happened since then? I don't
exactly.
Right? Yep.
Yeah. So I have the example of the nail salon that I go to, and they have a big giant sign outside that says, voted best 2009, 2010, 2011. And it's 2019. It's really old. And they could very easily change that and adjust the framing to have it instead say voted best 3 years in a row. And our brain doesn't have that same question of, well, what happened over these last 8 years that you've gone downhill? And then the last one is just being too confusing. So when you have so many possible routes of, click here or call or go to this or do that, or maybe you should try this and we refinance this and when there are too many things, the brain just gets overwhelmed and won't do anything.
I love that. That's fantastic. There was a question that I added just this later. You and I were talking about it before we started recording, and it's a pet peeve of mine. I feel like not only in marketing, but in the media in general, fear is that big motivator, right? And that's something even at CUInsight over the past few years, we've tried to get away from the fear clickbait, right? And you see that a lot. Is there a way to trigger the subconscious brain without being negative? Can we be positive?
Yes, we definitely can. And I hate that too. That's where I can't watch the news, right? Where it's like, is, your tap water killing you? Find out at 11. Nope, it's not, right?
Nope. I just had some. So
yeah.
Right.
But the concept behind a lot of this is that we as humans are loss averse, and that scarcity, act now, don't miss out is something that our brains definitely want to take advantage of. FOMO is real, and it's based on some of these concepts. But in loss aversion, our brains are motivated more by losses than gains. It's been proven in many, many, many studies that it takes twice the joy felt by a gain to equal the pain that's felt by a loss. So if you're giving things away, you'd have to give $40 to equal the pain felt by losing 20 is essentially how that would work. And it's not something that's a good place for businesses to be in. And even though we've set ourselves up in a society of really being gain focused, but the thing that really makes loss aversion work is perceived ownership. So once the brain feels like it owns something, it doesn't want to give it up. And it doesn't take a lot of time to get to this. I give an example of the overnight test drive, or just taking a test drive of a car in general. Once you've touched it, you sat in it, you made sure it looks good in the garage, your brain has now taken ownership over this thing and it doesn't want to give it up. So your old car now looks way worse than it did when you drove into the dealership, right? So triggering perceived ownership and making someone really feel the tangible benefits can make a huge difference in them not wanting to give something up. And it doesn't have to be that you're saying, and you don't want to lose out, like it's this negative thing. So I give the example for financial institutions of, there are so many promotions of, swipe your card 20 times and we'll give you $50, right? Some version of this. And so that is, and often, it's 90 days after the promotion ends that you'll get this money that's out there somewhere. And it's not as motivating. It's sort of, you haven't taken ownership over that money. It's fictitious. It could happen someday. If you were to instead flip that around and say, hey, we've put $50 in your account. If you use your card 20 times this month, you get to keep it. And it's, available versus current balance. So it's not like there's anybody being driven into overdraft territory or whatnot. But if you can see the money in their online banking or mobile, then they start to think about what they might get with that. Oh, there's this pair of shoes I've been looking at, or however many cups of coffee you could buy, whatever. You start to feel that $50. And if you don't swipe and make it, you feel like that was on you. You knew it would go away. It's not that it's a negative thing. It's still a gift from the financial institution.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I love that example. This is a question I always enjoy asking. And in conversations like this, you came from a marketing background. I love the marketing and the way I like people in general, right? Just like, and watching them. But for our finance and accounting friends out there, what's the ROI for the credit union behind all of this?
Well, the nice thing would be if the whole point of marketing is to get people interested and get them to take an action. So getting them to call, getting them to come in. If you get through the subconscious filter for more people on each piece, that means more leads per piece and more conversions per piece. So your ROI definitely goes up.
I want to move on to the leadership and life hacks portion of the show. You'd mentioned it's been 2.5 years now since you left the credit union. What inspired you to take off on your own and make this your career path?
Yeah, I had been doing freelance on the side for a few years, and it was just some life opportunities that timing worked out that we were able to move a little bit further away, and I didn't want to have the commute. But it was also when I was starting my master's in behavioral economics. And so having this opportunity to where I could really focus on school and seeing how it was going to be building into my work and what it could be, just really had this great opportunity and timing of being able to focus on it instead of it being, I'm so busy with work and I'm having to do this thing on the side, but I could do extra research. And what ended up happening as I was in the field, I knew I was early and I thought I would be one of many, one of a few at the front end. And I really found pretty quickly that this marketing business messaging of behavioral economics just wasn't there yet. Nobody else was doing it. And so ended up running with the podcast. And now I have a column at Inc.com and just lots of other public speaking engagements and things that people are just really starting to realize that this is happening. And I'm excited to be there.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and your column on Inc. will also link too, because
thank you.
That's fantastic. I remember when you put that out that you'd gotten that, I was like, that's amazing, awesome. Congrats on that one.
Thank you.
Has the inspiration changed at all? Like you just mentioned that you thought you'd be one of a few out there getting into this, but now you've realized that you're kind of on the forefront of it, let's just say. So in the past few years, you went through the master's program. Has that inspiration changed at all?
It has. I think what's been really great about the podcast, and I know your podcast is focused on, U.S. credit unions. So I don't know if you're getting a lot of external stuff, but it's sort of like every day the people, what I thought was a big deal, what I thought was this like amazing opportunity and the biggest thing I was able to imagine is now just the tiniest thing of what I can and do. So having my podcast now has downloads in 132 countries last I checked, and I have people reaching out to me all the time on social media saying like, just want you to know I just got one actually a couple days ago. Just want you to know, like, you have listeners in Israel that love this. And I have people, and I've had someone from South Africa, from Spain, Portugal, India, that they send me messages and want me to know how much they love that the podcast is there. And I've had, people, so Texas A&M University's Human Behavior Lab, they're big fans and listeners, and we've started doing some research projects together. And then also just all sorts of large global multi-billion dollar companies reaching out, asking about consulting projects and things. So it's just been amazing and helping me to see that what I think is a big deal, it can always be bigger than that. So it can always be something more.
So in this part of the show, we talk a lot about leadership. Since you've started working in behavioral economics, has your view of leadership changed? I mean, you're working with a lot of different, companies and credit unions and people, quite honestly, universities, you just mentioned. So
yeah, it has, but I think more than that, it's actually reinforced some of what I was always doing and didn't really realize why it worked, I guess.
Okay.
And so I've always been I feel like transparent leadership is the best thing that you can be doing. And I was always very open and honest with my staff and asking lots of questions and looking for all the ways we could be poking holes in, how could this go wrong? What are all these opportunities? And, training my team to do that sort of inquisitiveness and changing things up and having a walking meeting or, whatever, getting out of the space or whatever it happens to be if we needed it that day. And so I think now it's just realizing, you're able to be more creative if you're getting out of the flow. People are more likely to be open and trusting of you if you're trustworthy all the way through and honest and transparent, right? So, I think it's just helped me to see the concepts in the brain as to why those things have worked, so I can then communicate to others that those things that I was able to accomplish while at Verity and other roles weren't just flukes. This is why they work and how you can replicate that.
Is there something that if, say, people were listen through all the episodes of the podcast, or maybe if someone from your Verity team was listening today, that they've all heard you say over and over again?
Yes. So, I think that there's a lot of what I've been saying recently is more that it's really easy to find the right answer to the wrong question. Yeah. And instead taking the time to make sure you are working on the right question, that should take a lot more time than what we give it when you go into traditional brainstorming or whatnot. You start with this assumed item that might be false, and then you're getting all the way down a wrong path. So.
That reminds me of a story when I went through DE. We had a gentleman who was a CEO of a credit union in the area that our DE project was supposed to be. So we just assumed what he was saying was right. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, we realized it couldn't have been more wrong.
Oh, great.
It had to start from scratch. We were answering the wrong question the entire time. It had to start over. Yeah. So you got to love it. And when you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made or you see other young leaders make often?
I think it's very similar to maybe some of what you're saying here, but that herding behavior, humans are a herding species. So assuming just because that's what everyone else is doing, that's what you should be, and marketing on rates when that's not what gets the brain. We don't make decisions that way. We don't do the math that way. And so putting it out there just because that's what everyone else does doesn't have as much impact. And so I did a recent project with a credit union and they wanted to promote their rewards checking. And it was like, we're so excited. It's 1.26% APY on up to $25,000 in balances. It was like headline for our new checking account. Yeah. And said, no, let's not do that.
I was going to say, that sounds about the exact opposite of everything that you've built a career on and believe in. So
Right. So instead we did your checking account pay you $315 last year? It's the same numbers, it's the same equations, but it hits the brain different. And from what they had put out, they had an increase 60% month over month checking account openings. So
that's quite the return there. So
yes,
that goes back to the ROI question earlier. There you go, right there. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received that you find yourself going back to over and over?
It's really just knowing when it's best, I think, to hire somebody to do something, which part of what we talked about earlier before we got on the call, but, knowing what is the best use of my own time and where it's best to bring in somebody else and that they don't have to do the thing exactly the way I would do it and, allowing them to be creative. And you can often come up with just much more amazing things if you leave that room assuming I don't know everything and all the ways it could possibly be. I love that in working with designers, being able to come in and say, I'm thinking sort of, this is the mindset behind, this is what I'm trying to convey. And then they'll come back with something that's just so much better than what I could have come up with myself, because my brain doesn't work that way. So I get when I see it, but giving people room to create in their own space is something that is a good life lesson. I
tend to agree with you there. It seems to amaze me that I feel like I know less the older I get, at least. So.
I think that's the sign of wisdom.
Right? Is that what it is?
We'll knowing what you don't know.
When you run into a wall, is there something you mentioned going for the walking meeting or, reaching out to others? Is there something that you do to bust through a problem where you're like, I'm just not getting through this one?
Yeah, I do. I like to talk it out with some people. That can be helpful, but taking a walk, getting out of space, working on something else is often what you need to do. And knowing if you're not making your way through this because you're focusing on it too much. So assuming, your conscious brain can only focus on so much and your subconscious is doing all this other stuff. If you take a break and say, okay, conscious, we're going to do something else. So then the subconscious can be working this problem sort of in the background. It'll keep evaluating what's going on. I used to, be out jogging and would see buses and whatever and think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why, blah, blah, blah. I'd come into work and I'd have this whole list of ideas and things to be working on. So that's where, so many people get their great ideas in the shower is because you're not focusing on them. So shaking it up can make a difference. And knowing that even teeny tiny images, so having, visionary logos around you are things that inspire you. There's a study that people who saw an Apple logo for a fraction of a second versus an IBM logo were much more creative in a future task, even though the fraction of a second, they couldn't consciously register that they even saw it. And then they were working on this other task, you're more creative. It all influences the way you approach things.
That's pretty cool. I find what you're saying so interesting just from taking that step back. It had me thinking of the question that I was excited to ask you, especially with your marketing past, right? But the idea, and I've asked this to a lot of different people at different levels in organizations, but the idea of keeping your message fresh, whether it's to your team, a lot of what you've talked about here is that idea of, with behavioral economics, like how people react to messaging in a sense. So is it important to, like, if we're talking, let's say specifically about a credit union, is it important to change the message up to be consistent with the message? Is there like something to,
Yeah. So I think it's good to be fresh, but consistent. Okay. And I worked on a project, it's like, we saw great returns on this, but it's been out, we sent this mailer twice, so it's time to do a brand new one, to which no, like, a 5 or even a 10% return like we saw on that piece is great, but that means 90% of people potentially just didn't even see it. Right. Yep. And if it worked, it will likely work again. And you think about just really great brands, again, like Target, Apple, there are things that, if Target was to come out and say, we're really over the color red, we've been doing this too much now, right? There are things that you need to be able to see and know this is XYZ credit union, this is them. And you have to put so much into making that be really consistent. But there are new ways to make that happen. You can be showcasing a different feature in each advertisement about auto loans or whatnot. I love the example of so if you think about State Farm Insurance, they have about 1 million different things they could put on an advertisement, and they could list out, the long, it has check, all these things. But they did that commercial and dedicated an entire single commercial to the person making the phone call at 3:00 in the morning. And so you're nodding. Do you remember who was on the other? It's Jake.
Jake. What's Jake
State
wearing,
Farm.
right?
Yeah, khakis, right? And that's an entire commercial series dedicated to the fact that they're open 24 hours a day to take your call.
Right.
That's such a small thing of all of what they do, but it breaks through the filter. It helps you to remember them. It says something about who they are, and they can keep that consistent. So
I want to move forward to kind of the last part of the show. Be respectful of your time. And so these are more rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. If you have a free day, nothing on your schedule, what does that look like? What do you like to do?
I like to not have an alarm. It's probably my favorite thing. And I like to go on would be great to go on a walk with my husband, be a little bit more leisurely, maybe, take the kids out to do some fun stuff. And we just love to travel. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you remember the first time you got into trouble, like memorable trouble that you can share with us?
The most memorable thing that I had thought about was, I remember back in a world before cell phones, walking to, a friend's house that was, several blocks away, and where my mom says, you have to call right when you get there, or else.
Yes.
Yeah. And there was one time, we walked there and we were having so much fun, and I totally forgot to call. And then my mom called the parents and confirmed we were there, and that she let me know she was coming to pick me up, and I had to go home. I couldn't stay the night anymore because I had broken my, vow to call, and I was crying, and it was this whole rigmarole, but, didn't forget in the future. So
you called after that. So.
Yes.
Do you have any daily routines that you do that if you just don't do them, your day feels off?
I think it's, we have breakfast together every morning. We have eggs and coffee and whatnot, and the kids getting ready and everything. So I think if it wasn't some of that togetherness in the morning, it would definitely feel weird.
That's pretty cool to start the day, right? So,
yes.
The random question: what's the best album of all time? The one you can listen to from front to back.
Abbey Road.
That's a good one. The Beatles have been mentioned multiple times here.
As they should be.
Right?
As they should
be. So I'm a reader. We have a stack of books in our house that have been recommended to us that we're trying to make our way through as I look over at it.
Right.
Is there a book over time that you've recommended or gifted to others?
Yeah, the go-to that I always recommend is A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger. And it gets into a lot of that, the advice I was talking about earlier about the right answer to the wrong question and looking at question storming instead of brainstorming. It's just a really, really great book.
Well, you just added to the list because I have not read that one. So as you've gotten older, what's become more important to you and probably more interestingly, what's become less important to you?
I think that, the balance with family has become more important, and making sure there's a real hard stop of work and things that are non-negotiables on missing and whatnot, as there's more demand on my time and travel and things like that. I also, early on in life and in my career, I know I was somebody that it was more important to me that I looked as good as possible. So I'm a vocalist, and it was like at karaoke, I would only sing songs that I knew I could nail. And I didn't want to play games that I couldn't win. And I didn't put myself out there and come up with really big projects or things. It was just doing the stuff where I knew I would look good versus what was going to be the best possible thing that might be a little bit of a personal risk for myself to prove that I could stretch those boundaries. And now it's been more about what is truly the best thing to do, even if I might not look great on the path.
I love that. That seems like that's a comfort level that comes with age as well, right? Or experience, let's just call it. So I have a question that I don't send. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Oh, I would say, big motivators for me would be either, I actually love Ellen DeGeneres, and I think Oprah, just the things they've been able to do, or some big successful people. Absolutely.
I use, as Jill is embarking on a new career, I keep saying, is that going to get us on Oprah? I just want to sit off to the side. Let's do something amazing, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I thank you so much for being on the show, Melina. The last question that I have for you is, do you have any final asks of our listeners or any final thoughts you want to share?
Well, definitely, as you had recommended throughout, I guess the ask would be, if anything seemed sort of interesting, go ahead and check out the Brainy Business podcast. You can find it on all the podcast locations or at thebrainybusiness.com. And you can find me on all the socials as the Brainy Biz, B-I-Z. And I'm always happy to interact. So if you wanted to just send an email to melina@thebrainybusiness.com, I'd be happy to chat with you.
That is fantastic. We will link to absolutely everything in the show notes. Out of all those, is there a preferred method of contact? Twitter, email? Or just anywhere they want?
Oh, thank you. If you just have a quick little snippet, I think, Twitter is a really great place to go. If you have a more in-depth question and want to chat about it or see about speaking, things like that, email is a really great way to go.
That is awesome. We will link to everything. So again, thank you so very much for your time today. And I enjoyed this greatly. And I hope everyone else does too.
Thank you. I did as well.